Caleb Strick vanished in 2004. Jacob Welder disappeared in 2011. By the time Micah Lang resurfaced in 2015, America realized it wasn't chasing a man. It was chasing a nightmare born in the wilderness and spreading like wildfire. Jacob Wilder was not the kind of person who made the news. He lived a quiet, almost invisible life in Benton Falls, a town tucked between rolling hills and farmland in Missouri. People in town knew him as the guy with the camera, a soft-spoken 32-year-old who spent most of his time hiking, photographing birds, and posting scenic landscapes online. He lived alone in a small rental cabin on the edge of town, kept to himself, and never caused any trouble. To most, he was just another harmless face in a quiet place. On the morning of October 17, 2011, Jacob packed his gear for what he called a short solo trip to the Ozark National Forest. He didn't tell many people where he was going, just a quick text to his sister saying he needed time to disconnect. He loaded up his old Subaru with a tent, food supplies, water bottles, his camera, and a notepad. Jacob often used these solo trips to reconnect with nature and reset his mind. He wasn't the adventurous type in the traditional sense, but he had a strong love for the quiet and the wild. When Jacob didn't return after 2 days, no one panicked. It wasn't uncommon for him to lose track of time or extend his trips. But after 4 days of silence, his sister reported him missing. The police located his vehicle near a trailhead about 12 miles into the forest. The car was locked, parked neatly, and undamaged. Inside, his packed lunch was untouched, his flashlight was off, and his phone was nowhere to be found. The scene didn't suggest panic or violence. Everything looked oddly peaceful. But Jacob was gone. Search teams combed the area with dogs, drones, and helicopters. They found nothing. No torn clothing, no footprints, not even a broken branch. It was as if Jacob had stepped off the trail and vanished into the trees. The longer the search went on, the more eerie the disappearance became. Experienced search and rescue volunteers, many of whom knew the area well, found it bizarre that someone could disappear without leaving even a single clue. Then investigators turned their attention to Jacob's camera. He had a habit of uploading his photos weekly to a cloud account. His last batch had automatically synced just hours before he vanished. Most of the pictures were what you'd expect: trees bursting with fall colors, close-ups of birds, deer drinking at a creek. But buried among the hundreds of images was one that chilled everyone who saw it. The photograph appeared to have been taken at dusk. Trees loomed dark in the fading light. Off to the left, behind a cluster of bushes, stood a figure. He wasn't dressed like a hiker. No backpack, no visible gear. He wasn't walking, either. He was standing still, partly hidden by the foliage, staring directly at the camera. His face wasn't clear, but his posture was unnatural, rigid, almost as if he had been standing there for a long time, waiting. There was no reason for Jacob to have noticed the man. He might not have even seen him when he took the shot. Investigators enhanced the image, but couldn't pull any more detail from it. Whoever the man was, he was positioned far enough away to remain out of focus. But the intent was clear. He had been watching Jacob, and he had known exactly where to stand to remain just barely visible. This single image shifted the case. What was once seen as a tragic case of someone lost in the woods began to look like something far more sinister. The media caught wind of the photograph, and soon the story exploded online. Reddit threads speculated that Jacob had been stalked. Conspiracy theorists claimed it was a forest spirit, while others insisted it had to be the work of a human predator, possibly someone who had been living off grid in the forest. The police received dozens of tips, most of them useless. One caller claimed she saw a man dragging a deer carcass near the trail where Jacob vanished. Another reported hearing screams at night while camping weeks before the incident. None of these led anywhere. Yet the image of that figure haunted everyone. Something about the way he stood, watching silently, as if he didn't just happen to be there, but had been waiting for Jacob all along. Weeks turned into months. The trailhead where Jacob's car was found became something of a ghost landmark. Local hikers avoided it, and families canceled trips to the forest. Even seasoned rangers admitted the area had taken on a strange, unsettling atmosphere. Jacob Welder had disappeared without a trace, but the photo he left behind suggested that someone had been following him. Someone who knew the woods better than anyone, and who might still be out there. The manhunt was just beginning, But even in those early days, one thing was clear: this wasn't just a missing person case anymore. Something much darker had taken root in the Ozarks. When investigators looked deeper into Jacob Welder's disappearance, they began cross-referencing old missing persons reports from nearby areas. At first, it was a standard procedure, searching for patterns, coincidences, or any hint that Jacob's case wasn't an isolated one. What they found disturbed them. A case from 2006, nearly 5 years earlier, stood out. 2 hikers, college students named Emily Harrow and Jason Clyde, had vanished during a spring break trip in the Cherokee National Forest, about 200 miles east of Benton Falls. Just like Jacob, their car had been left at a remote trailhead, parked and locked, with their gear still inside. There had been no signs of a struggle, no screams reported, no reports of wildlife activity. The search lasted for weeks and covered miles of rough terrain. Nothing was found. The most unsettling detail: a camera was recovered from the couple's belongings. Most of the photos were unremarkable, happy selfies, scenic shots, the kind of memories young hikers would capture. But the last photo was different. It was blurry, seemingly taken by accident, but clearly showed the silhouette of a man far in the distance, partially hidden behind the trees. The image was eerily similar to the one recovered from Jacob Welder's camera. A few years later, in 2009, a 41-year-old woman named Lisa Penbrook had set out on a solo camping trip in northern Arkansas. She was an experienced outdoorswoman, known in local hiking groups as cautious and skilled. Her last communication was a text to a friend saying she had just reached her campsite and was going to light a fire. That text was never followed by another. When search teams found her 10 days later, it was fully intact. The zipper was still closed. Her belongings were arranged inside, her journal left on the camping chair, with a pen still resting on a half-finished sentence. Her cooking pot was filled with water, and kindling was neatly arranged in a pile. Everything looked frozen in time, as if she'd simply vanished in the middle of preparing for dinner. She was never found. Investigators revisited the Penbrook file and discovered something they'd previously overlooked. In Lisa's journal, she had written a few strange entries in the final pages. One read, "Saw a man across the river this morning. He didn't wave, just stared." A few pages later, another, "He's still here. I saw him again just before dusk. I don't think he's camping." That was the last entry. The connections between these disappearances were impossible to ignore. All occurred within national or state forests in the Midwest. All victims were experienced enough to avoid getting lost. All left their vehicles and gear behind in a way that suggested they were interrupted, not careless. And in all 3 cases there was a reference, either photographic or written, to a silent, watching figure in the distance. Law enforcement began working with the FBI, hoping to determine whether these cases were part of a larger, more disturbing pattern. Forensic linguists compared the language in Lisa's journal to notes found on Jacob's notepad. Phrases like, "he's watching," and "across the trees" appeared in both. The similarities were too precise to be dismissed as coincidence. While the FBI dug through databases and psychological profiles, a local independent journalist named Marla Veck started her own investigation. She was drawn to the wilderness cases and believed there was a serial predator hiding in plain sight, someone using the vast, unguarded landscapes of America's forests as his hunting ground. Marla found old ranger logs from various parks reporting odd sightings, food caches disturbed with surgical precision, makeshift tree blinds built deep in the woods, and reports of someone whistling in the distance at night. Marla compiled dozens of accounts and came to a chilling conclusion. This person wasn't wandering aimlessly. He was studying people. He followed patterns, anticipated where hikers would go, and struck when they were most vulnerable. Alone, far from trails, just as the sun disappeared behind the trees. One name began to surface again and again in her research: Caleb Strick. He was a former Marine and survivalist who had taught wilderness skills in Utah until 2004. That year, after a messy divorce and an investigation into disturbing comments he made to students, Strick disappeared. No one knew where he went, and he wasn't officially reported missing because he had left a note saying he was going back to nature. That phrase would later appear in one of the wilderness journals recovered during the investigations. When agents pulled Strick's military and mental health records, they found a man obsessed with dominance, control, and the idea that modern society had made humans weak. He believed the forest was where the strong reclaimed their purpose, and worse, he had the skills to survive there indefinitely. For the FBI, the question was no longer if these cases were connected, but how many more there might be. The disturbing possibility was that Jacob, Emily, Jason, and Lisa weren't the only ones. They were just the few whose remains, or last traces, had been found. The rest, perhaps, had vanished so cleanly that no one even knew they were missing. A new kind of fear began to grow. This wasn't just a serial killer. It was someone who used nature as camouflage, patience as a weapon, and silence as his signature. As the evidence mounted, the FBI officially named Caleb Strick as a person of interest in what was now considered a string of linked disappearances spanning nearly a decade. Strick had become a ghost, his last confirmed sighting dating back to early 2005 at a gas station near the edge of Yellowstone. Since then, there had been nothing. No credit card activity, no communication with family, no trace of movement. He had simply vanished into the wilderness, and the federal agents assigned to the case believed that's exactly where he had intended to go all along. Strick wasn't just any survivalist. His military background gave him a strategic edge. He had trained in covert tracking, reconnaissance, and wilderness escape techniques. He knew how to make shelter from bark and moss, how to filter water with rocks, and how to create false trails to mislead anyone following him. In the right environment, he was nearly impossible to detect. FBI profiler Dr. Elena Mears was brought in to build a psychological profile. She pored over Strick's military file, journal entries, and even notes from his failed marriage counseling sessions. The picture she painted was one of a man who felt betrayed by modern life. He viewed cities as infections, people as soft and unaware, and technology as a crutch that dulled the human spirit. In his writings, he spoke of the return to blood and bark, a phrase that would haunt agents for years. Dr. Mears believed Strick had transformed his personal rage into a mission to reassert natural order by targeting those who represented modern fragility. Hikers, campers, and outdoor enthusiasts weren't just victims of opportunity. They were symbols of a world he despised. With the profile in hand, law enforcement launched Operation Ridgewatch, a multi-state surveillance and search initiative targeting remote forests across Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Rangers and agents were trained to spot signs of illegal forest occupation, camouflage shelters, unnatural fire pits, hidden game traps. A database was created to track disappearances in rural areas. Publicly, the agency said they were addressing a spike in missing hikers, but internally, they were hunting one man. Despite the resources, Operation Ridgewatch yielded little. Strick's movements, if he was even still alive, left no trail. But in late 2012, a park ranger in Red River Gorge stumbled upon something while doing a routine check after a lightning storm. A portion of rock had collapsed, revealing a narrow cave entrance that had been sealed with mud and branches. Curious, he entered and found what looked like a long, abandoned hideout. The interior was chilling. The walls were lined with scraps of newspaper, articles about wilderness disappearances, and missing person posters. One section contained neatly organized camping supplies, rope, knives, flashlights, even maps with coded markings. There was no blood, no remains, but at the far end of the cave, buried under a pile of dirt and moss, they found a waterproof container. Inside were wallets, watches, and identification cards, including Jacob Wilder's driver's license. DNA confirmed the shelter had once belonged to Caleb Strick, but it had been vacated months earlier. The discovery reignited media coverage. People were terrified that a predator had been living in the forests, walking trails used by thousands, hiding just beyond view. Campgrounds emptied, hiking trails were closed. News outlets dubbed him the Phantom of the Pines, though authorities avoided using any names publicly. They didn't want to glorify him, they wanted to find him. Dr. Mears noted something chilling about the Red River bunker. It wasn't just a shelter. It was a museum, a place where Strick could revisit his victories, reflect on his ideology, and plan his next steps. The collection of IDs showed he didn't view his victims as people, but as trophies. But just when it seemed the trail had gone cold, another twist emerged. In a small town outside Asheville, North Carolina, a farmer reported something odd. He had set up trail cams on his property to monitor deer activity, but one morning, A photo showed a man passing through the woods at night. The figure had camouflage paint on his face, was carrying a bow, and wore what looked like hand-stitched animal hide clothing. Authorities rushed to the site, but the man was gone. However, what they found nearby was unmistakable: another crude shelter built into the hillside, and a small fire pit still warm. At the edge of the site was a carving in a tree, a spiral made from intersecting lines. That same spiral had appeared in Lisa Penbrook's journal, scribbled in the margin next to her final entry. It was proof that Strick, or someone mimicking him, was still moving. This discovery raised a chilling new question. Was Strick operating alone, or had he recruited others who believed in his twisted philosophy? If so, the hunt was no longer for a single man, but for a movement, one that had learned to survive in silence and strike in shadows. By early 2014, the case had taken a dark and unexpected turn. What had started as a search for one rogue survivalist was now morphing into something much larger. The discovery of multiple shelters scattered across different states, all constructed in the same methodical way and marked with the same spiral symbol, suggested a chilling possibility: Caleb Strick had either created or inspired a network. Whether it was a cult, a survivalist militia, or simply a copycat collective, no one could say for sure. But what was clear to federal agents was that Strick's ideology had not died in isolation. It had spread. Faced with increasing public pressure and political scrutiny, the FBI escalated its efforts. A tactical task force was formed, involving specialists from the Bureau of Land Management, park rangers, and counter-terrorism units. The plan was simple but risky. Bait Caleb Strick or his followers out of hiding by staging a false operation in a place he was believed to revisit often, an isolated area in Kentucky known as Devil's Hollow. Devil's Hollow had a long, grim history. Locals called it cursed land, dense with thornbrush caves and sheer cliffs. For decades, there had been reports of strange sightings in the area. Lights moving through trees at night, whispers echoing through rock tunnels, even a story of a family dog that disappeared without a trace after wandering into the woods. While most brushed these off as folklore, investigators took the location seriously. Caleb Strick's name had come up in a witness statement in 2007 from a hiker who claimed to have shared a fire with a quiet, intense man near Devil's Hollow. That man had spoken of cleansing the world of artificial men. The FBI set their trap carefully. They staged a small research team pretending to conduct geological surveys, complete with tents, vehicles, and trail cams. The team included 4 undercover agents trained in wilderness operations. Over the span of several nights, they quietly spread surveillance equipment and waited. For over 2 weeks, nothing happened. The forest remained quiet, almost unnaturally so. No movement was detected beyond birds and deer. But on the 19th night, just before midnight, something went wrong. Agent David Holtz failed to check in during a scheduled radio contact. His last transmission was a brief whisper. "I see movement." Minutes later, his GPS tracker stopped moving. By morning, the team discovered his tent slashed open, sleeping bag torn apart, and blood smeared along the fabric. But there was no sign of David, no footprints beyond his own, no drag marks, nothing. Only one camera had caught something unusual. A brief, grainy image of a figure, tall and lean, crouching near a tree and wearing what looked like patchwork leather and animal hide. The figure wasn't Strick. Facial recognition technology confirmed it. The man caught on camera was Micah Lang, a former Army reconnaissance specialist who had trained with Caleb Strick during their early military years. Lang had been discharged under mental health grounds in 2003 and had disappeared from the system in 2006. His name hadn't appeared in any of the previous investigations. Until now. Lang's reappearance confirmed what many in the task force had feared: Strick had not only survived but had built a following. Lang was the first known member of what agents were now calling the Pale Order, a name derived from a torn notebook found in one of the abandoned shelters. Inside it, the words, "The Pale Order will endure," had been scrawled repeatedly. Over the next week, agents scoured Devil's Hollow. They found booby traps strung with fishing wire, crude wooden spikes in the ground, and small animal bones arranged in spirals. It was no longer just a manhunt. It was psychological warfare in the forest. Then another unexpected turn. Lang was captured not by agents, but by chance. A highway patrol officer in Colorado pulled over a beat-up truck with no plates. The driver was disoriented, gaunt and barefoot. Inside the truck were expired rations, a hunting bow, and a blood-stained satchel. Fingerprints confirmed his identity. It was Micah Lang. Lang said very little in custody, but what he did say shifted the investigation again. He claimed that Caleb Strick had changed. He broke from the vision, Lang whispered during a psychological evaluation. He doesn't choose anymore. He kills without order. Lang insisted that the pale order was meant to be a test of survival, not a spree of violence. He claimed Strick had grown unstable and had become a danger to the others. When asked how many others there were, Lang refused to answer. But he left them with one warning. He's building a final place. You'll never see it coming. With Strick still on the loose, and his intentions growing more erratic, the agents knew time was running out. Lang's capture brought more questions than answers. What was the final place he referred to? Where was Strick hiding now? And perhaps most importantly, was there anyone left in the Pale Order who still followed him? Devil's Hollow had proven one thing, beyond any doubt the predator they were chasing wasn't just skilled and dangerous. He was no longer alone. In March of 2015, after more than 3 years of pursuit, Caleb Strick remained a phantom. His trail had gone cold again. Despite the capture of Micah Lang, federal agents still had no solid leads on Strick's whereabouts. But then a forest fire changed everything. The blaze began in a remote section of the Great Smoky Mountains, an area closed to the public due to unstable terrain and frequent rock slides. Park officials initially believed it was started by lightning, but investigators soon found evidence of an illegal fire pit at the origin point. Nearby were crude wooden stakes, half-burned maps and bones, animal and human. Forensics couldn't immediately determine identities due to the extent of the damage, but one piece of evidence survived: a steel ammunition case buried just outside the burn zone, partially melted but intact. Inside the case were more of Strick's trophies: ID cards, photos of victims, and a blood-stained patch from a military uniform. Also inside was a journal, singed at the edges. Its pages were filled with ramblings about decay, rebirth, and the final cleansing. One chilling phrase appeared repeatedly: Ash will return the order. Using satellite imaging and drone sweeps, federal investigators uncovered the remains of an underground structure deep beneath the scorched forest. It had been carved into the slope of a ravine and hidden under decades of debris. The fire had collapsed most of it, but investigators could tell it had once been an elaborate bunker, reinforced with salvaged materials, stocked with survival supplies, and rigged with primitive traps. The entire setup had been intentional, isolated, defensible, and now destroyed. Amidst the debris, a charred body was found. It was male, and despite the condition of the remains, dental records confirmed the identity: Caleb Strick. The news was met with disbelief. After years of evasion, the country's most elusive fugitive had apparently perished in a fire he likely caused himself. Whether it was an accident or a final act of self-destruction remained unclear. Some believed Strick had grown paranoid, torching his own stronghold when he sensed investigators closing in. Others theorized he had chosen death on his own terms, unwilling to be captured and caged by the very society he had rejected. The announcement of Strick's confirmed death brought a wave of relief across the public. Media outlets declared the nightmare over. Campgrounds that had been abandoned reopened. Park rangers resumed regular patrols without fear. But behind closed doors, agents weren't celebrating. Because even as the manhunt officially ended, the threat had not. In the weeks that followed, more evidence came to light. Investigators found encrypted digital files recovered from hard drives at the burned bunker site. The contents detailed locations across the country: deserted cabins, cave systems, and remote shelters, some already discovered, some still unsearched. The files also included communications between Strick and others, some dated just months before his death. While the full list of names remained classified, one thing was clear: the Pale Order had not died with him. Scattered arrests followed. A man in Montana was caught stalking hikers with a bow. A woman in Oregon was found living in the wilderness with journals filled with Strick's ideology. Another follower in New Mexico was linked to a disappearance from 2013. Each arrest pointed to a broader network, bound not by location but by belief. A shared ideology that glorified survival, isolation, and violent cleansing. Even more disturbing was a theory forming within the task force: What if Strick had planned for his own death? What if the destruction of his bunker had been part of a broader plan? To become a martyr, an eternal symbol for his followers. The idea was horrifying, yet increasingly plausible. The manhunt had turned him into a legend. His survival skills, his ability to disappear, his violent mission, all had inspired people to leave behind normal lives and take to the woods. Dr. Alina Mears, who had profiled Strick from the beginning, warned that the psychological impact of his legacy would far outlast the man himself. He taught people how to vanish, she told a private committee briefing. He showed them how to kill without being caught. But most importantly, he gave them something to believe in. The case of Caleb Strick came to an official close in August 2015. The files were sealed, and the story faded from the headlines. But those closest to the investigation knew better. They knew that in the quiet parts of the country, deep in the woods where few dare to go, others were still out there, training, waiting, watching. What began as one man's descent into madness had become something far more dangerous, a movement that could survive without him. The nightmare was over, but the echoes remained. Caleb Strick was gone, but the forest, as always, kept its secrets.